and welcome back to the Ask Dr. Renee show. I am your host, of course, Dr. Renee, and I need you all to please share the broadcast, as I always ask and beg. Please share the broadcast. If you're watching on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever you're watching on, please make sure you share the broadcast. This is some really important information, particularly for our community. So tonight we have a really special guest. We have a member of the BlackDoctor team, and she's one of the newer members, but she is going to do some amazing work to transform lives and across the world, probably. But we're really excited to have her. So let's bring her on. Good evening, Dyan.
Hi, how are you, Dr. Renee?
I am
Thank
fabulous.
you.
How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. And what an intro. I have to live up to that.
So, Dyan, explain to people, what is your position with BlackDoctor.org?
I am so thrilled to have started working with BlackDoctor.org as VP of Clinical Operations. And what that means is that I will be leading the effort to have BDO support clinical trials. And why we're doing this is because BDO already has your trust and has an incredible community. And we know that better health is delivered through clinical trials. We consider the access to clinical trials whole part of health equity. And if we don't get people of color into clinical trials, we won't know whether or not those drugs work for us. So it's really imperative that we do this. And I'm so glad to be here to support that effort.
So, for those that somehow missed it, I'm not sure how, but clinical trials was a huge topic during COVID because, of course, people were like, oh, they came up with this too fast and da. And they didn't realize that the clinical trials for COVID vaccines actually did involve Black people, which is why the
Yes.
vaccines we knew worked on us. So,
Yes.
for those that don't realize, clinical trials are really very, very important. Can you explain exactly the importance of clinical trials?
So I'll dial back just a little because I think that you touched on something that was really significant regarding COVID. I was actually part of conversations, sat in on conversations that companies had with the FDA, trying to ensure that people of color, that Black folks participated in clinical trials. And it did take an extra effort. They had to make an effort to make sure that people were aware of the clinical trials, make sure that people were aware that they are safe, manage the history that we've had, and we have to face up to the history that we've had with clinical trials, and help people to become comfortable. And BDO was really a big part of that process, helping people go from, no, I don't want to participate to, or no, I don't want to take the vaccine, to yes, I'll take the vaccine. That's the transition that had to take place in our community in order to get us to participate in the vaccine studies and to take the vaccines ultimately. But that same effort is what's needed for clinical trials overall. And even with the vaccine that the research that you were referring to, Dr. Renee, I myself said, oh my God, I know how long it takes for a vaccine to be developed. I've been in this industry for more than 30 years. I get it. I did not myself expect a vaccine for at least 3 to 4 years. But little did I know that mRNA vaccines had already been in process, had already been in research. And so that it was a matter of just applying that mRNA process to COVID. And therefore, the vaccines were made available pretty quickly. Clinical trials overall, again, are really important. And there are two factors that seem to influence whether or not Black folks participate in clinical trials. One is this whole history that we have. Everybody remembers or has heard about Henrietta Lacks.
Henrietta Lacks.
Yes, Henrietta Lacks. I grew up in DC, and I was told as a little girl, when I go to Baltimore, don't go near Hopkins. And it turns out that was the story, that there was some reality to that. And we all have some of that lore in our background. However, the industry has truly learned over the years what to do to make sure that people are safe. So there are plenty of safeguards in place to make sure that your well-being is taken care of.
Well, let me just interrupt real quickly.
Yeah,
for
let me
those
go.
who have
Yes.
no idea what Henrietta Lacks. Henrietta Lacks is a lovely woman who she went to Hopkins, and I something
For
had
ovarian cancer.
ovarian
Yeah, for
cancer,
ovarian cancer or
had
uterine cancer. Uterine
yeah,
cancer.
uterine cancer, had a procedure, and they actually took her cells and kept them unbeknownst to her, and was doing testing on them, and never ever got her permission
That's
or
right.
anything.
She and
So,
her family was never compensated,
right.
and her
And it
cells
actually,
are
her
the
cells,
back.
yeah, her
Oh,
cells
go ahead. Go
actually
ahead. Please
helped
say.
us to discover a whole lot of different things, and so that's why, they're call them HeLa cells, HeLa,
Yes.
so Henrietta Lacks. And if you're in med school, then you've learned that. And so that is why, and like she said, no compensation to her family, or
None.
was to her before she died, or to her family. So that is why we tend to shy away, because they never got her permission. Where there's a huge
That lack of
difference now.
trust. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a huge difference
That lack
now.
of
Clinical
trust.
trials. Oh my goodness, I've participated in clinical trials. When I tell you that there is like 10, 15,
A ton,
sometimes 20 pages to
ton of
explain
paperwork.
exactly what is going on before they can get your consent. And I mean, and it's like you have to go through several sets of these pages usually, and they sit down and they talk to you and make sure you completely understand, and you initial
In
this
plain
page and that
language.
page. And I mean, it is so thorough that there
And
is
even
no way in 2024 that you are going to participate without your knowledge. It's just not going to happen.
and and even once you give your participation, there are teams of people that are overseeing the study all throughout the study, most specifically the institutional review board, and they check for safety all along the way. You always have the option to opt out, always. So things have really changed a lot, but the trust factor is one factor for us not to participate. The other side that I think is just getting recognition is this whole thing around unconscious bias. I have never been offered an opportunity to participate in a clinical trial. And that, as we survey, as a matter of fact, BDO has done surveys and to see whether or not people have been asked to participate, or if they're aware that they can participate. And those numbers are pretty high. The answers are no, they haven't been asked. And so I've been actively working with sponsors to help to train sites to help raise their awareness that they have got to ask everybody, just like we have been impacted by history, so have they. They think that because they see a person of color come into their site, they're not going to ask someone to participate, because they make the assumption that they're not going to participate because of that history. And that's not true. I've done many sessions with many groups that as long as we help people understand the process, raise awareness about what it takes to participate in a clinical trial, most people are pretty willing. And I think so that's the campaign that we will be on at BDO.
And honestly, the I've participated in clinical trials, and there's always an incentive, and usually it's money. And they will pay for, because sometimes it's some extra visits to the doctor or to the hospital. They usually will pay for transportation. They'll pay for parking. There's all these things to incentivize you. I know that I've also heard through the grapevine that some clinical trial doctors that are leading them are like, oh well, Black people aren't reliable, and they're not going to do, because the one thing with clinical trials, there is usually a very strict regimen that you have to follow, and you have to follow it to a T. So if they tell you have to take this pill at 2 p.m., then you got to take it at 2 p.m. If you have to, for me, I did asthma studies. If I had to take this medication every morning, this inhaler, then I had to take it every morning. So there's really, really strict guidelines, things that you have to do. And they'll say, oh, well, Black people aren't going to do that, which is so untrue. Because needless to say, most of us are on medication, and we seem to take them every day, because that's why we're still walking the earth. So, and like I said, so they incentivize you as well, like I said, with money.
They really, it's usually
Go ahead.
in the form of reimbursement,
Right.
because it's reimbursement, so that they make sure they want to do everything that they can. The sponsors, the pharmaceutical companies, the researchers, the academic centers, they want to do everything that they can to ensure participation. There are even in place, depending on the therapeutic area, nurse navigators who will work with you. We know that in real life, in the real world, there are issues with compliance. We put everything in place to make sure compliance is not an issue. You will have the best health care ever being part of a clinical trial with
You
all
will,
the
because
monitoring and all the
exactly.
support that you get.
And if it's for a condition that you have, like I have asthma for you who've never watched the show before. So I did asthma studies. So it was actually helpful to my actual physician because I had these extra physicians on the team that were also monitoring my asthma in between my 2 visits a year to my
Yes.
allergist. So, and we were able to, they were able to give me the information that they collected so I could give it to him and he could see, this extra test or extra study that I did. So it was actually very beneficial. And I want one of the studies is the reason why I wear a Fitbit to this day. There was a study that I did, and they gave me a Fitbit because they wanted to know about most asthma attacks happen at night for those that don't know, and they wanted to know about sleeping at night with asthma and something. And so it was something the Fitbit was monitoring or whatever. And so what they didn't tell you was that at the end of this study, you got to keep the Fitbit. And that's because they wanted to encourage you to keep coming back like they were supposed to. So we got to keep a Fitbit. And
And,
so that's how I ended up start wearing Fitbit more than
and
15
that's me
years
too.
ago.
I
Yeah.
haven't been a part of the study,
Right.
but it certainly has changed my behavior.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's how I actually started wearing a Fitbit. But when you do clinical trials, sometimes you get the placebo, sometimes you get the actual medication, depending on what kind of a trial it is. Like I said, that Fitbit one had no medicine involved. It was just Fitbit. But there was others that I've taken where I was given medicine, and I don't know if I had the placebo or the real one. But I took what I had to take every day like they told me. And then also think about it, you're getting free medication at some of these studies. So if you don't have health insurance or your health insurance has a huge copay, here's another way to get your medication for free. So it's really, there's so many huge benefits. And one thing that I think a lot of people don't know, and we've talked about it here at Black Doctor several times, there is actually a drug on the market, a hypertension drug that does not work well in Black people. And it's because the people who were part of the clinical trial were older white males. And basically, we don't have the same makeup. And so for that reason, that drug just does not work well on us. And if you don't know, Black people tend, unfortunately, hypertension is something that is really huge in our community. So there's a medication that just doesn't work for us because the proper testing wasn't done. And so that is my favorite example of why clinical trials are so important.
I'll add another example, and I won't mention the drug name.
Yeah.
I had launched a brand globally, and the company for which I worked would send me, when I would go on these trips to around the planet, they would give me a package of medications to take with me just in case something happened on the road. And one of them was a sleeping pill. I'm 5 feet tall. I looked at this sleeping pill that I would take to get on a transatlantic flight so I could hit the ground running, got rest on the plane. And I just instinctively, I took half the tablet. I said, I'm not sure this is going to be appropriate for me to have the whole thing. 10 years later, when this drug went generic and other studies were done, the researchers learned that women should only be taking half the tablet of what was usually prescribed. In the meantime, people had been in accidents. People had done all kinds of crazy things in their sleep because they were overdosed. And because the studies were not adequately done in women, we didn't have the right information. So this happens over and over. So the contribution that you make in participating in clinical trials is one for your own health, certainly, but it's going to help a whole slew of other people to make sure that we get adequate treatment.
Yeah. So this is why it is so important. And those that read the BDO newsletter, I'm sure have already seen, different things about clinical trials. But if you just watch our broadcast here, then you might not have known, which this might encourage you to go to our website, blackdoctor.org, and actually join the newsletter so you
Please.
can receive this information and figure out if you qualify. I mean, you never know until you look at see what the trial is. You never know. You don't necessarily have to have a disease for some of the trials. I've participated in a trial for fibroids. I do not have
It
fibroids,
does
but they
safety
needed
studies.
both
Yeah.
sides. They needed people with fibroids and they needed people without fibroids so that they could do this study. So you never know what you could qualify for.
So on the BDO website, we do have a clinical trial center where we have various sponsors set up and access to their studies, full descriptions of those studies, and the ability for you to assess whether or not you are eligible. And you can go through those steps without any obligation, and until you actually sign up with a clinical trial site, you're not being included. So you can always go in, investigate, learn, and get more comfortable and until you feel comfortable. And even with the newsletter and various other communications that BDO has, we're going to step up how we're going to be talking to you about clinical trials. Again, BDO did an incredible job with COVID. We're going to have that same full court press rather for clinical trials. You're going to see us everywhere. We want to be the authority on clinical trials, and we want to make sure that we continue to be that trusted relationship and trusted resource for you for clinical trials.
I'm trying to bring up the page.
Oh, good.
I see it, but okay.
Yeah, right now that's the change that's going to come. Right now, it's not as easy to find, I have to say.
No. I see they have the menu at the top now. My issue is for some reason sharing on this thing is not as friendly.
Okay.
As it used to be.
Well, I'll tell you, I can say as I was looking at coming on board to BDO, I went on the site and took a look around and said, okay, this is buried. This needs to be more exposed. So we are in the process of changing the website a bit so that clinical trials will be easier to find.
Okay. I don't see, where is the window?
Right now it's under resources.
No, not you. It says I'm sharing, but I don't see it. I don't see it.
I don't see it either, unfortunately.
Well,
is there a way to put a link up on the screen?
Oh, yeah. We can definitely do that. I just wanted to show it. But yeah, it's if you go to the website, right at the top, it tells you, it says clinical trials on the
it got moved.
menu options.
It got changed.
So I definitely encourage you guys to please check that out.
Thank you.
No problem. But yeah, so this is our website in case you didn't know. But Clinical Trials has their own little home on the site, and you can go in there and navigate around and see. So yes, go to the website, BlackDoctor.org, look for Clinical Trials. It's one of the menus on the top, and just explore and see. You'll never know. Also, there's no age limit on clinical trials. It depends on the clinical trials. Sometimes they're looking for children. COVID vaccine, they did infants, they did toddlers, because they wanted to make certain that they had vaccine that was safe for everyone. And so
as a matter of fact,
go ahead.
Sorry.
No,
that actually is a fairly new trend. When I first got into this industry 30 years ago, most studies were only done on white males 18 to 35. And even cardiovascular studies, you didn't see any people of color. You didn't see women. And in the last, so starting about 2012, the FDA started issuing guidance around diversity in clinical trials. And we all kinds of diversity. Just like Dr. Renee was saying, babies, children, women, age is no limit. But it depends on how the researchers build the protocols as to who is going to be part of a clinical trial. But the FDA has really been pushing especially in the last 3 years. And there's legislation now that has been passed to help to support this effort to ensure that clinical trials represent the real world. Because again, if the studies don't include people that are representative of the real population, we won't accurately know how effective or safe these drugs are in the full population. So we are, again, an agent of change supporting the FDA in this effort to ensure diversity in clinical trials. And soon you're
Yeah.
going to start hearing more about size. So and this is what Moderna did. They took BMI out of the protocol because they said, what does that have to do with COVID? We don't need it. That's a rate limiter, not an expander. And that's how researchers are starting to look at studies. Do we really? I mean, I talked to one researcher who wanted to do 3 spinal taps in a year on patients, and I'm like, one is bad enough. What are you going to learn with doing 3? Let's make sure we get to just 1. So that's, again, thinking about what's going to be appropriate for the patient, not just the data that's being collected by the researcher. So that's, again, how we are thinking about appropriateness for the patient, for the participant, and not just gathering data. So I'm excited to be part of this. This is something, I mean, since I've been in the industry, I was usually one of very few Black folks, and I was always asked to help the companies that I worked for get diversity in the workforce as well as get diversity in clinical trials. And that was in addition to my day job. So this eventually became really a passion for me. And over the last 15 years or 18 years, I've really been fighting the industry, pushing to put the patient at the center, as well as increase diversity in clinical trials. And it is gratifying to see how many companies are really now on board to do this and make sure that they include everyone in their studies and include everyone safely.
Yeah, we've come a long way. Needless to
Yes,
say, but
believe me.
yeah, it's such necessary work. Like we said, it's really, really important that we test, especially if the drug is going to be prescribed to a certain population. You need to make sure that they were tested on it and make sure that that we know that this dosage works or whatever. So it is so very important, and I'm so glad that BlackDoctor is helping to
Oh,
increase those numbers, because we have the audience right here.
that's right.
And and our audience likes to be informed, and this is another way to be informed. Like I said,
Yes.
if you read through every word of those different studies, you will be very informed. You'll have more information than you ever
Yes.
wanted to have, probably, about your basic hypertension medication or whatever it might be. So please, make sure you visit the website. While you're at the website, go on and join the newsletter, so you'll get it right in your inbox. But definitely go to the website, check out clinical trials, and see if maybe you qualify. And if you have any questions or comments, you can always put them here, and somebody will try and get back to you. But
We will
thank
reach
you
out.
so much, Dyan, for your time today and for sharing this wonderful news with us. We're very excited to have you on board, and we're so excited to be a part of the conversation. This is just another conversation that BlackDoctor is a part of, and now it's clinical trials.
Yep. And as we evolve, Dr. Renee, with your grace, hopefully you'll have me back to
Yes.
let everybody know our progress.
Oh, definitely, definitely. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And everyone, have a great night.